And I believe we are live on Facebook. So thank you to everyone that's joining us for Northern Kentucky History Hour. Ludlow, How Transportation Transformed a City with Dave Schroeder. We have a few others that are joining us still here on Zoom. And thank you to all of those joining us on Facebook Live. We will be getting started at 6:30, so in about 5 more minutes. Thank you all for joining us. Should have probably turned off that nice little dinging sound, huh? Before I got started. Keeps me on my toes though. Let's go ahead and record. Did you hear that? Okay. A few more minutes and we'll go ahead and get started. Got a lot of familiar names in here from other Northern Kentucky History Hours. So thank you for being loyal watchers, loyal participants. Oh, and we got a message from the Buggy that I might be related to. It's kind of cool when I can maybe find family. Oh, I'm not probably related. Darn. Oh, well. Okay, still got a couple more minutes. Still got some few people coming in. Welcome, Marianne. Welcome, Patty. Thank you all for joining us. Everyone should be muted. And you're welcome to keep your cameras on if you'd like. Welcome, Patrick. And everyone joining us on Facebook Live, we will be getting started shortly. We are just admitting more guests in on Zoom, and then we will get started. Welcome, Arnold. Janine Crimebrink. Welcome, Janine. Thank you all for joining us. Just a couple more minutes. It's about 6:28 right now. We'll get started at 6:30. And like I said earlier, you're welcome to keep your cameras on if you'd like. If not, you can turn them off, but just know that other people can see you. It's about that time. Let's see, let's go ahead and get started. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Northern Kentucky History Hour. I am your host for tonight, Mary Jane Calderon. I do communications here at the museum, so all those lovely emails that are sent your way, those come from me, so you're welcome. Northern Kentucky History Hour is a project of Behringer-Crawford Museum, Northern Kentucky's History Museum. Let's begin by thanking all of those that make this program possible. And welcome, Paul. And Behringer-Crawford Museum is supported in part by the City of Covington, Kenton County Fiscal Court, ArtsWave, Kentucky Arts Council, Northern Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame, the Carol Ann and Ralph B. Hale Jr. U.S. Bank Foundation, and our members. If you're not yet a member of the museum, please consider joining for access to discounts and exclusive programming. Learn more and join at bcmuseum.org. Okay, let's see here. Before we begin, let's go over a few reminders. Everyone's microphone has been muted so we can all focus on the presentation. Feel free to turn off your video if you prefer. Otherwise, others on the call are able to see you. Let's see, even when the screen is being shared. If you have a question or comment to share, please type it in the chat feature and we will try to get to as many questions as possible immediately following the presentation. Also, there will be a quiz question tonight. The first respondent to enter a correct answer in the chat on Zoom or Facebook Live will win a Northern Kentucky History Hour pin and bragging rights, of course. So let me finish admitting a few of you here. And let's go ahead and meet tonight's speaker. Dave Schroeder, the 2017 recipient of BCM's Two-Headed Calf Service to History Award, was named Executive Director of the Kenton County Library in 2007. He previously was archivist for Thomas More College and the Diocese of Covington from 1996 to 2000, returning to Kenton County Public Library in 2000 as the Kentucky History Librarian. He serves as President of Board of the Friends of the Kentucky Public Archives and is a past member of the Kentucky Archives and Records Commission from 2007 to 2018. Schroeder is the past chair of the Kentucky Public Library Association and past president of the Kentucky Library Association and chair of the Kentucky Public Library Association Advocacy Committee. He is also a member of the American Library Association Advocacy Committee. Dave, welcome.
Thank you. That was a mouthful.
Yes, I know. I hope I got that all right.
Well, I'm glad to be here tonight. As Mary Jane said, before I became director of the library, I was the head of our history and genealogy department. So anytime I can talk about local history, I'm excited. So it's great to be here. It's great to have so many people here watching. We're gonna talk about history through the lens of transportation, and we're going to use the city of Ludlow as our example. And I think I give you a little description of history in general. We think of history as being a certain thing or as taught in a certain way. And throughout our history, we have taught history differently. So depending on your age, the way you learned history may have been, you learned more about those who were in leadership roles. So you learned about the founding fathers, you learned about, specific groups of individuals. And those are very important, and we still need to learn those things. But there's also been other ways of looking at history. Frederick Jackson Turner is a good example. He was a historian at the turn of the 20th century, late 1800s, early 1900s. Turner viewed history through the lens of the frontier, and it's called the Frontier Thesis. And his whole idea was that history is focusing around the frontier, and American history in particular focuses around the frontier, and that movement east from the East Coast or west from the East Coast and east from the West Coast was the driving component behind American history. And so he talked about history through the lens of the frontier. There are other historians who have looked at history through the lens of the economy. So they are looking at, the markets and industry and how that developed and really transformed America. In the 1950s and 1960s, social historians started emerging, and they started looking at history in different ways. They started looking at different groups of people that had not been looked at in the past. So women's history, Native American history, African American history, immigrant history. One of my favorite topics is immigration and how immigrants transformed our country and continues to do so. But there's also a group of historians who look at transportation as one of the driving forces of history. And so we're going to do that a little bit today when we look at the history of the city of Ludlow. And it has gone through many transformations and continues to do so. And transportation is part of that process even today. So this is our opening slide, and you'll see on the city's logo, transportation is strongly featured. You know, there's the engine, the steam engine with 1864 on it, which is the year the city was founded. And Route 8. Route 8 refers to the main drag through Ludlow and through much of the river cities in northern Kentucky. In Ludlow, Route 8 is known as Elm Street. So when I talk about Elm Street, I'm talking about Route 8. So let's talk about some early development. This is the earliest home in Ludlow. It's called Elmwood Hall. It was built between 1818 and 1820 by Thomas D. Carneal. Carneal was a Kentucky legislator. He owned a significant amount of property, including Bromley, Ludlow, a significant portion of West Covington, and into the DeVue Park area. Was one of the major landowners in early northern Kentucky. He built a home named Elmwood Hall, which still stands today, and we're very fortunate. I saw one of the owners of Elmwood Hall is here today, listening to this presentation. So we're tying the old with the new here. But if you look at the two pictures of Elmwood Hall, the one at the top hand left is showing the front of the building. So the part of the building facing you, the viewer, with the round window above, the lunette above the main door, that is the main front of the building, the original front of the building, and it faces the river. The picture at the bottom right-hand photo shows the back of the house, the original back of the house with the kitchen wing. The kitchen wing is long gone. But that part of the house actually is now the front of the house. A street's been put in behind the house, and the orientation of the house moved from the back to the, or from the front to the back. So when this house was built, transportation in northern Kentucky and in greater Cincinnati in 1818, 1820 was river traffic. And so when you look at the early modes of transportation in northern Kentucky and in Ludlow in particular, it's the river. So the Ohio River is the major component that is bringing people to and from Elmwood Hall, that is bringing visitors to this area. Elmwood Hall is a working farm. And so they were transporting goods back and forth between the farm, the estate, to Cincinnati or to other locations across the Midwest. Interestingly enough, and we talked about social history, one of the things that Elmwood Hall in early histories of Ludlow was kind of glossed over was that Carneal was a slaveholder. He owned a significant number of slaves, and slaves were active on his property. They probably helped build this building that we're seeing, and worked his farm. And so, again, finding the history of people who were not represented maybe very well in the past is something that we're doing much better at as historians these days. So we're recognizing the contributions of all people. So Carneal was a leader in northern Kentucky. He has another house in Covington on 2nd Street, which you're probably familiar with. He probably never lived in that home. That was more of a model home to sell lots in Covington. He actually lived in Elmwood Hall in Ludlow. This building, by the way, still stands. It's 101 or 201 years old this year. So it's amazing that it has lasted. It's extremely well preserved, and it's very well taken care of by the current owners, who I consider to be good friends. So I'm very grateful. The picture in the middle shows the main, just one portion of the main entry hall. It's a really spectacular example of federal architecture right here in our own backyards in northern Kentucky. So remember the river on this one. The second house in Ludlow is Somerset Hall. It's also known as Clawson House or the Clawson Court. It was built by William Butler Kennedy, probably about 1847. Now, the picture at the top left hand is the original front of the house, and it also faces the river. The portion at the bottom of the screen is the back. Now, the porch was probably added on later. The wings we think were original. The porch was probably added on later. This is the current residents and residents for years tend to use this as the front entrance. This faces another street. So again, the orientation of this house has changed from facing the river to facing the city or facing the street. The beautiful house, again, a wonderful family lives in it. They have taken great care of this home. At one time, it was Masonic Temple in Ludlow. The Clausen family, who owned Clausen Maps in downtown Covington for many, many years, lived in this house for decades. It's another beautiful example of pre-Civil War architecture in Northern Kentucky and really in the United States. Both Elmwood Hall and Somerset Hall are both on the National Register, and both have Kentucky Historic markers. And we thank the Historical Society, the Kenton County Historical Society, and others for making that happen. But again, this house was oriented to the river. Both of these homes had gardens in front of them that led down to the river, and they were oriented directly to that river. The river was the major means of transportation for this home as well. And again, this family was from Louisiana, and they brought their slaves north during the summer months. And this was a home that was used primarily in the summer, and it has been maintained extremely well. Slaves were probably involved in the construction of this home as well. If you're familiar with the name, so William Butler Kennedy, we have a Butler Street in Kentucky and in Ludlow, and we have a Kenner Street in Ludlow. And Thomas D. Carneal, who built Elmwood Hall, we have a Carneal Street in Ludlow. So these family names are still remembered in the city. This is another residence from one of the early kind of well-to-do residents in Ludlow. This is the Richie House. Of the three, this is the only one that does not exist. It was torn down in the 1950s and replaced by a Kroger department store. At one time, the property pretty much expanded an entire block between Locust and Carneal Street on Elm. The picture on the top left depicts the house, the front of the house. So it's facing Route 8 or Elm Street. The picture at the bottom right, or yes, the bottom right, is the back of the house. You'll notice we have double veranda. So it's a two-story veranda that is facing the river. So when this house was built, the residents were, looking for the cool breeze off the river. They were had the view of downtown Cincinnati, of course. And so the river, the orientation of this house in some ways was also facing the river. The Richie family, by the way, we are indebted to them for many reasons, but one reason is Caspar Richie, who was a Swiss immigrant, so he was from Switzerland. One of his descendants actually was a photographer, an amateur photographer. So both of the photographs here, the top one is a postcard that's been colorized. The bottom one is an original from one of his it was one of his sons, Walter Richie, who was a photographer. Walter left us 4 albums of photographs of Ludlow. And some of them existed on glass plates, but many of them had been lost. We knew we had copies of some of them, but we didn't have the originals. And I was working at the Covington Library one day, and I got a box, and I opened it, and there were 4 albums in it. And I started going through the first one. I'm like, this is Ludlow. This is the 1880s. And there's a letter in the box, and this gentleman was shopping in I think it was Columbus, Ohio. He was at a yard sale, and he found these 4 albums. The inside was signed with the Richie family, Ludlow, Kentucky. He bought them for like $20. And he said he couldn't let them just be thrown away, and he was afraid that was what was going to happen. So he bought them, put them in a box, sent them to the local library, meaning us. So we have 4 major albums of 1880s, 1890s, and early 1900 photographs of Ludlow. He photographed everything. And so many of the photographs that you'll see today, and if you go to our Faces and Places database online at the library, you can see many, many more examples of his work. But we are indebted to the Richie family for documenting the history of Ludlow through photography and passing that along. They also left a series of diaries that are in the hands of the Cincinnati Historical Society that I'll talk about in a few minutes. This is a very early map of Ludlow, and it was actually done by one of the Richie family members. It's in his diary, Casper Jr., I believe, but it shows the original layout of Ludlow from his perspective. If you look at the bottom, so the main street running through the entire map, so this street here is Elm. This is the current Route 8. This is where you would go under one of the railroad tracks where they are now. So this is Ludlow pre-railroad. You see a number of things on this that I think are very interesting. This here is Somerset Hall. So that was the second house I showed you, facing the river. This is Elmwood Hall, facing the river. And this large home here is the Richie House. Now, it's more in a developed part of Ludlow by this time, but again, it has some orientation towards the river. Another thing that I think is interesting, when you think of Ludlow, you don't think of it being an agricultural area, but if you look at this map, truck gardens, truck gardens, truck gardens. So outside of the downtown area of Ludlow, which is now totally developed by homes, were gardens. Here's a pasture, and this is the Queen City Racetrack, which was an actual racetrack that was run in Ludlow by the Burns family. Their descendants lived in Ludlow until about 5-6 years ago. The last one passed away. This has all been developed as well. But it's a really wonderful photo or a snapshot of Ludlow about 1860, give or take. It would have been soon after the Richie House had been built. So we've talked about the river. The other mode of transportation during this time period, when a road was constructed, and I'll show you that road in a few minutes, is horse and buggy. So I think this is a great photograph of horse and carriages. This is Elm Street. The main building on the left is the Oddfellows Hall, which was torn down in the 1970s, unfortunately, and was replaced by a bank. The other buildings on that block are fairly well intact, as well as the ones across the street that you can't see on this photo. But I love this postcard. It's a great snapshot of Ludlow, turn of the century. So horse and buggy, the major means of transportation. I'm going to show you a photo too a little bit later on of this, pretty much this very block. We're going to see something different in the street, a new development in transportation. Ludlow also, because of the river, we had a ferry in Ludlow. This is the one of the last ferries that operated between Ludlow and Cincinnati. And many of the early residents in Ludlow were fairly well-to-do. The Richies, the Clausens, before them the Kenners, the Carneals, the Bullocks, all of these old Ludlow names. They pretty much many of them owned businesses in Cincinnati, and they lived in Northern Kentucky. So they had the benefit of, having the large population across the river, but they didn't want to live in crowded downtown Cincinnati. And so they took the ferry back and forth. So the ferry to Ludlow was important for them. The ferry operator by the early 1860s wasn't very good about keeping a schedule. He was not very good about, operating when he was supposed to operate. And it became very frustrating by the 1860s for the residents of Ludlow who needed to get back and forth. So many of those families actually owned their own boats and were traveling back and forth, but it really wasn't practical. And so the residents of Ludlow got together and decided in 1864, actually they started in 1863, talking about incorporating as a city. And their idea was if they incorporated as a city, they would be able to regulate the ferry. So in 1864, February of 1864, they petitioned the state government to become an incorporated city of the Commonwealth. The legislature approved that incorporation. And so the birthday of Ludlow is actually February of 1864. The first city was laid out in 1846. And the first house, Elmwood Hall, was 1818 to 1820. So we go back a lot further than 1864, but that's when we became a city. What they found out, however, was when they formed the city government that they had no authority to regulate the ferry. So the whole idea of incorporation to regulate the ferry didn't really pan out, but it got city government going. Eventually, the ferry was bought out by a different family and started to maintain a regular schedule. So again, we're still oriented primarily to the river at this point, 1860s. The river is a major means of transportation still for Ludlow. Horse and buggies internally, for the most part, especially prior to the Civil War, the river is still that main focus of transportation. So here's a map of Ludlow. It's from the 1860s. The one thing that I wanted to point out to you, it's actually for a little bit later than that, probably early 1870s, because you can see the railroads being laid here. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But I wanted to show you this map because what it shows is a new road. So this road here that's hugging the Ohio River, today is called Ohio Avenue. It was originally called Washington Road after the first president. And it was the primary means of transportation by land between Covington, West Covington to Ludlow. As you can see, it hugged the river. This is prior to any lock and dam system along the Ohio. So this water rose and dropped at will. And so this road flooded frequently. It was not very well maintained by the state. It was actually a state road. It became hit or miss. So at times it was passable, at other times it was not. Today, it does not connect all the way through. So you can follow it to maybe right through here and it ends, and you can follow it off Swain's Court in West Covington and it ends. So it no longer connects. That area, that low-lying area, the road has been abandoned. So you cannot get through there. Ludlow and West Covington eventually find a solution to that as well, that I'll talk about in a minute. We did have a development of a road company being built in the 1860s. There was a group of residents in Bromley, in Ludlow, and interestingly enough, in Boone County. Now, I'll explain the connection to Boone County in a minute. They came up with a road and they called it the Dry Creek Turnpike. There's a creek in northern Kentucky that empties into the Ohio called the Dry Creek. So they called it the Dry Creek Turnpike. This is where the Dry Creek Turnpike crossed over the Pleasant Run Creek, which divides Ludlow and Bromley. So this is the division. This is the creek that divides Ludlow and Bromley. This was built by the Dry Creek Turnpike. It was a private road, so it was privately funded. There were stocks sold, and there were tolls collected on the one side of this bridge, the Bromley side of the bridge. So to use this road, you had to pay for the privilege. Now, people in Boone County were part of the developers of this property, or the developers of this road. Many of the farmers in Boone County were looking for markets for their goods. Ludlow was the first city into Kenton County where they could get to a major population center and sell their goods. And then once they got to Ludlow, they could take them into Covington. So there's been this connection between Boone County and Ludlow that existed until when I was a young child, for instance, the Connor Marching High School Band in Hebron always was in the Ludlow Memorial Day Parade. Because for many years, Hebron had a closer connection to Ludlow than they had with Florence because of the road system. That sounds really bizarre today because, you know, Boone County is so developed and we have such a, you know, a built up road system in Boone County. In the 1860s, 1870s, well into the early 1900s, that wasn't the case. And so Hebron and Ludlow had a very close connection up until the 1970s even. And so it's interesting how that connection carried on long after the need was there, but the two communities were linked and remained linked for a long, long period of time. I love this photograph because I think that, I don't know if that bridge doesn't look the greatest bridge in the world, but it did its work. And again, this is a toll road. So this is a company that's formed to make money. And so they were making money off the farmers who were bringing their goods into town to sell them. So we've gone from river to roads. So we've gone from the Ohio River and the ferry to the Dry Creek Turnpike going to Boone County and Washington Road, which became Ohio Avenue, going to Covington. Now we have another major development, and it's the railroad. The Cincinnati Southern Railroad is established in the 18 really gets off the road in the 1870s. It was actually financed by the city of Cincinnati. It's the only railroad that was owned by a city, a major railroad owned by a city. So it was owned by the residents of the city of Cincinnati. They passed a tax to build this railroad that would connect Cincinnati to the markets in the South. Cincinnati was trying to get hogs. We're not called Porkopolis for nothing. Getting hogs and other livestock to Northern Kentucky and into Cincinnati. Procter & Gamble being a good example of why. But also, Cincinnati wanted to sell finished goods south. And so the railroad was the means of doing that. The railroad bridge that's still there that connects, it's been rebuilt, but this is the first version. It was rebuilt in the 1890s. This is the original bridge that connects Ludlow to Cincinnati, Cincinnati's West End. This bridge was opened in 1877, I believe. It was designed by Buscarin, who is one of the major engineers on the Cincinnati Southern. And I think the story of why the railroad ended up in Ludlow is interesting. The Ludlow family owned the property that the railroad was offered in Ludlow. Covington was wanted to get the railroad through its city. Newport also wanted the railroad. The selling mark for Ludlow was the Ludlow family. By this time, the Ludlow family had bought Elmwood Hall. They had bought most of the property and they were developing a city. They laid out the first plat in 1846. By the 1860s, they were selling lots, but wanted to sell more lots. And so they saw this opportunity of getting this railroad that would go right through their property. And so they offered basically the property for free to the railroad as a right of way through Ludlow at a 100-year lease. And that was the bargaining chip that actually brought the railroad through Ludlow. So Covington did not offer a similar project. Newport did not, Ludlow did. So the railroad chose Ludlow to be the crossing point over the Ohio and also to be the main route up the hill through Crescent Springs, Erlanger, et cetera, and into Boone County. So the railroad arrives in Ludlow. In 1870, Ludlow's population was 817 people. So a small town, very small town. By 1890, it was 2,569. Almost all of that growth was due to the railroad. And when you think about it, the Ludlow family wasn't just giving them this property because they wanted to be nice to the railroad. They knew that once the railroad came through Ludlow, their property values would increase dramatically. So they started laying out new subdivisions. They started bringing other industries that needed transportation south. And so Ludlow became, had an industrial district along the railroad tracks. And it also attracted a lot of families to Ludlow who bought lots and built homes. The other thing the Ludlow family did, which was genius to me, was any church who wanted to develop a congregation in Ludlow was given a free lot. And so they were able to attract most denominations to Ludlow to build a church. So many of the churches in Ludlow are originally Ludlow property, Ludlow family property. They also basically gave the city its first lots for its public school. So they were building up a community, a strong community with access to social activities, religious activities, transportation back and forth between Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky, and with lots that were available to sell for homes. So the Ludlow family was early land developers. They were, they built Ludlow into what we see the downtown to be today. It drastically changed Ludlow from more well-to-do residents, those villa residents that we talked about, those first 3 homes and the surrounding homes, into a working class blue-collar community. Most of the people moving in worked for the railroad or the industry associated with the railroad. So those bottom 2 pictures give a good indication of the railroad yards in Ludlow by the 1880s, 1890s. And if you look at the one at the bottom left, if you look in the background, you can see the Roundhouse. Ludlow had a roundhouse just like Covington did. I'll show you a map of that in a few minutes. But the railroad transformed the city from a more suburban kind of rural atmosphere to much more of a city of the late 1900s, early 20th century. Lots very close together, smaller homes built closer together. That's downtown urban core that we're familiar with today. That came about in Ludlow starting in the 1870s with the railroad. The other thing that the railroad did, it brought in lots of immigrants, primarily Germans and Irish. So if we go from left to right, the first building there is the first St. Boniface Church, which was the German Catholic congregation in Ludlow. They built a new church in 1892, 1893, which there's a drawing of, the next picture over. Again, it was a German congregation, so you'll see everything is in German. Both of those structures still stand, by the way. Irish Catholics came in 1886. They bought an old armory. It was an old social gathering place, and they turned it into a church. They built their current church in 1903-04. There's one of the stained glass windows. But this is just an example of the number of people coming to Ludlow to work on the railroad. Many of these folks came specifically to work on the railroad. These churches have combined, but what's interesting about it is when they combined, they sold the German parish. So the 2 photos on the left, those 2 buildings were sold. When they went to sell the original property, they had to track down the Ludlow family because the deed on the lot said that if it was never used, if it came to the point where it wasn't being used for a religious purpose, it reverted to the Ludlow family. So it had been donated to the congregation in 1872. So when they sold it in 1980, they had to track down the Ludlow heir, the closest Ludlow heir, who said, "We're not interested, you can sell it." But legally, they had to go through that process. Immigrants. Immigration is one of my interests, and immigration to Ludlow is one of my real interests. So I've gone through the 1870 census. In 1870 in Ludlow, 50% of adults were foreign born. Now think of that. You're walking down the street in Ludlow in 1870. Every other adult you run into is an immigrant. That number is astounding to me. And that was I had great grandparents that were living in 1870. This isn't, generationally, this isn't that long ago. 32% were from Germany, 28% were from Ireland, and 25% were from England. That number never ceases to amaze me. And when we talk about immigration today, we're talking about a totally different, the laws and the rules around immigration have changed drastically from 1870 to today. But that concentration of immigrants living in Ludlow would have been very similar to what was happening in Covington, Newport, Bellevue, Dayton. Immigrants helped to build Northern Kentucky. Many of these people came again to work for the railroad and the spin-off industries that happened around the railroad. So transportation brought these immigrants to Northern Kentucky. They brought them to Ludlow, and many of these families still remain today. Many of these names that you see on the 1870 census, those families are still in Ludlow today, or certainly still in Northern Kentucky today. The photo is the Richie family. So this is Casper Jr., I believe, and some of his children. So again, this is another wonderful photograph that was in that one of those photo albums that I got in the mail one day out of the blue. It's a great photograph. They're sitting on the back porch of the Richie House. I love the expressions on their faces. Everybody's kind of stern, but the little girl she's got a little bit of a smirk on her face. She didn't quite pick up that you're supposed to be serious in photographs during this time period. But just a great, insight of a family at the turn of the century. And I love the little boy's boots. This family was originally Swiss. So they were from Switzerland. So, he's got on boots that you might see in Switzerland during that time period. The high top boots. Just a great photo. Here's some other things about the railroad. You can see the Roundhouse there. So I'm going to point out the Roundhouse here. Here's the Roundhouse. Here is Oak Street. Elm would be here. So this would be Route 8. This is one street south, which would be Oak. This is Davies. And here is the Roundhouse. And you can see how massive the railroad yards were. This is one of the shops. This became part of Duro Paper Bag at one time. All of this is gone, by the way, this building. The Roundhouse is also gone, but the foundations are still there. Just to give you an idea of where you are in the city, here's St. James Church, which still stands, and here's Wesley Methodist Church, which still stands. So these two buildings are still here. Many of these homes actually are still here, but these are two major buildings that you might be familiar with. The current firehouse would sit right here. In this photograph, it says City Hall here, and it says Fire Department jail there. So this was the precursor to the current building that sits on Oak Street. But again, this is a Sanborn map, and it's you can find these maps on the library's webpage if you go to Sanborn Maps, and they cover all of Ludlow, Covington, Newport, Bellevue, and Dayton for the years 1886, 1894, 1909, and a few other years sprinkled in. They're all free. All you need is a library card, punch in your library card, and you have access to these wonderful maps. And as you can see, they lay out every building in the community. This building here was called the Corcoran House. It no longer exists. There's two new Habitat for Humanity houses on this corner. The Corcoran House was a boarding house for railroad workers. There was also a hotel here. You can see it here. It's called the Southern House. This was also a boarding house for railroad workers or people who were coming in from out of town. There were a number of these in Ludlow during this time period. And you can see how close we are to the railroad. Now, if you go north of here, this is where you're going to get to the bridge across the Cincinnati. So this is heading north. This way, you're heading south towards Crescent Springs. I love this photo. This is another Richie family photo. Just a great photo with the, what the guys are wearing, the bowler hats. This guy's on crutches, which I think is very interesting. But just a great, the clarity of this photo is just amazing to me. And again, if that one gentleman hadn't picked these up in a yard sale in Columbus, Ohio, and had the forethought to send them to the library, we would have none of this. It's just amazing to me. All of us have a role in saving our history. And I'm sure this gentleman thought he was saving history in a small way. I can tell you, to the residents of Ludlow, this is a big deal. These are treasures that, tell the story of our city. This is a photograph of that same area I was showing you. So here's the Roundhouse. You can clearly see the round shape. So you can also see how big these yards and how extensive these yards are. If you're looking down here, this is the lagoon. So this is the old Lagoon Amusement Park. So this is the west end of town. My house is down right around here. A lot of this property was leveled, and gravel was removed by Ideal Supply, which still is in Ludlow. It's a company. So they sold a lot of the gravel and flattened out this area, and this was developed eventually. This property here is the Pullman shops. So if you've ever heard of the Pullman Palace cars on the railroad, they were based in Chicago. They had a repair shop in Ludlow. It was destroyed by fire around 1913, and it was not rebuilt. But you can see this massive area that the railroad took up. And this building is several blocks long. Just to give you another indication, where I showed you where St. James Church was, on the photo, it's right here. And we can date this photo pretty accurately from this house. This is the rectory of St. James Church. And if you look closely, when you blow up this photo, you can see that the construction on this building was just being completed. There's no grass. This new tree was just planted. We know this house was built in 1922. So we're pretty sure we can date this photo to about 1922. So this would not be the Pullman shop then. That's where it was located. It would be something that replaced the Pullman shop, and I'd have to do a little research on it. But it's interesting when you look at photographs that, if you're looking for certain buildings and when certain things were built, you can usually pretty accurately date them. The Richie House, the one house I was telling you about, is right here. So the building still stands. This whole block right now was the Kroger store, and is now Riverside Marketplace, the pharmacy, a couple of small restaurants and shops. Okay, this is more of the railroad. So this is Route 8, Elm Street. You're heading into Ludlow. This is the old depot from the back. So this was the Ludlow depot where you could catch the train. If you're going west or east into Covington, this is the depot here on the other side. This viaduct was built right after World War I. And you'll see in this photo, there's no walkway. So this gentleman is walking on the side of the road. Eventually, a walkway was built the city built a walkway, which is the underpass, we call it today. But it was named in honor of the veterans of World War I in Ludlow. So it's called the Veterans Memorial Underpass. But again, there were regularly scheduled trains coming through Ludlow, and this is where you would go up the steps, or you would come from the other side. This is where you would catch trains. And there was a regular schedule of trains going north and south, and Ludlow had passenger trains as well as commercial freight trains coming through. This building lasted well into the 1960s. I think it lasted even into the early 1970s before it was torn down. It was kind of a shame to see that one go. The next big leap is the Street Railroad Company. So I showed you that postcard with the Oddfellows Hall, and I told you with the buggies on it, and I said there was something missing on the street. What was missing on the street was this, the streetcar line. You can see it here. This is the actual day that the first streetcar ran through Ludlow in 1894. And I love this. See the woman standing here? I love her hat, her bonnet, the kids watching, and the streetcar coming down. So this was the day they dedicated the streetcar in Ludlow. Again, this is a Richie family photo. This came through the yard sale. Without that gentleman, we wouldn't have it. But streetcar service came to Ludlow in 1894, and the Highway Avenue was built between Covington and Ludlow. There was a bond passed in both cities, and the cost was split between the two cities to connect them higher up than Ohio Avenue. So current Highway Avenue is well above the river level. So we're turning our back on the river, so to speak. We're connecting the two cities now by streetcar. And the streetcar not only brought, easy travel back and forth between Ludlow and Covington, but at the end of the line, the streetcar company wanted to build something to attract people. That's why in 1894, the Ludlow Lagoon Amusement Park opened. So the streetcar not only brought transportation to Ludlow, but it also brought the lagoon and the amusement park to Ludlow. It's interesting when you look at the owners of the Street Railway Company and the owners of the lagoon at the end of the streetcar line, they're identical. And it's not by coincidence. They were getting plenty of riders during the week going back and forth to work. People in Ludlow were going to Covington to work. They were going to Covington to shop. On weekends, traffic dropped off. So they wanted to build something at the end of the line to attract riders. That became the lagoon. And that's a whole nother story that I can talk about for hours, but I won't. So here's a map of Ludlow in 1884. This is the railroad. You can see clearly the bridge. You can see the city developing. The interesting thing is when Highway Avenue was built, so here Ohio Avenue is still there. 10 years later, Highway Avenue will come through. And this is Ash Street. This is the main road connecting to that original road to Covington. This was the major commercial area of Ludlow until 1894. This is where most of the shops were. This is where most of the commercial activity occurred on Ash. Once Highway Avenue is built, it connects not into Ash, it connects into Elm. And the commercial district shifts within about 10 years from Ash Street to Elm Street. And so now if you're coming through Ludlow and you're coming down Elm Street, you're seeing this is where most of the stores, most of the commercial activity is happening. It's on Elm, and it's switched because of the streetcar. Here was the end of the line. So I threw in some lagoon photos because I always have to throw in lagoon photos. But this was what was at the end of the streetcar line in Ludlow, this huge, beautiful amusement park. And my house actually sits on the Ludlow Lagoon at Land Edition #1. So when I pay my taxes every year, that's what it says on my tax, Ludlow Lagoon Land Edition #1. So here's a 1914 map of Ludlow. So you'll see with the railroad, things are moving west. So development is happening in this part of town. And you can see the railroad coming here. But you also see some other things happening. These big parcels are all farms. And if you look closely, it lists the name of the owner. This map is wonderful. It's about 6 feet tall. So if you come to the library, we can show you a copy of it. But you can see Crescent Springs developing here. You can see Fort Mitchell developing here. You can see Fort Wright, little bits of Fort Wright developing as well. And so you're starting to see a new form of transportation emerge, and it is the automobile. This changes Ludlow yet again. So this is Oak Street. Here's the Methodist Church I talked about earlier. And you can see Ludlow, the old part of Ludlow was not built for cars. Parking in downtown Ludlow is still not the best. There were no cars. It wasn't built for cars. Houses are closer together. They don't have garages. It was not built for the car culture. Starting in the 1920s and well into the 1950s, you start seeing more and more people owning automobiles. So this is Mount Echo Park. we're looking into Ludlow from Mount Echo. This is the old part of Ludlow. You can see the railroad bridge. Here's St. Boniface Church. This part of Ludlow is developing primarily from here over, primarily in the 1910s, 1920s into the 1940s. So my house was built in the 1940s in this neighborhood right over here. This is the ballpark. Actually, this is the ballpark here. This is a land that's actually being considered for development. Here's the high school. So if you're familiar with Ludlow, it kind of gives you the basic layout. This is a new addition I'll talk about to you a little bit later. But this part of Ludlow is developed much more in the car culture. Many of these properties here have driveways. They have garages. My house has a garage in the basement. You know, that was happening in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. So this part of town is much different than this part of town, primarily due to the automobile. The other thing that happens, which is a blessing and a curse, is I-75 comes through. Now, we think of I-75 as only being through Covington, and that's the way it was, and that's the way it always was going to be. There were several plans of getting I-75 through Northern Kentucky. One of them was to go along the route of the Southern Railroad, which would have brought it right through the heart of Ludlow. It would have destroyed the historic downtown part of Ludlow, and Ludlow would be a very different city. Covington wanted the expressway through Covington. They felt if it bypassed Covington, it would harm the central business district of Covington. So Covington fought very hard to get I-75 through Covington. Ludlow pretty much didn't want it. And so fortunately for Ludlow, we didn't get it. It would have really made a huge difference to Ludlow. But what did make a difference was that automobile culture, that whole idea of getting around by car instead of streetcar, took its toll on a lot of river cities. Look at Ludlow's population in 1950, 6,374. By 1990, 4,736. People could afford a car. People could afford to drive to the suburbs. People could afford to live in the suburbs and drive to the city to work. People were leaving the inner cities. They were moving to the suburbs. Ludlow experienced that phenomenon. So how can traffic be good? It actually can. So here's a recent photo of the cut in the hill in Covington. If you've been riding that recently with the construction on the Brent Spence, you know that this is not an unusual occurrence. Traffic backs up there consistently. And so what that has done, interestingly enough, is people living in the suburbs south of Ludlow and west of Ludlow, so Villa Hills, Crescent Springs, instead of getting on I-75 at the top of the hill, they're coming down high water or low water road and they're hitting Route 8 and they're going into Covington through Ludlow. Traffic through Ludlow, especially as this area has become more congested through the cut in the hill, has meant development in Ludlow. So Rivers Breeze, when I showed you that picture of Ludlow from Mount Echo, this is a development that started in the early 2000s, which is a condominium complex. There's another proposed complex just south of that, or west of that actually, that's right now kind of, Ludlow's trying to figure out what they're going to do with that. So we'll see if that gets built or not. But this development would not have happened without traffic congestion. People want to live closer to downtown where they have an easier commute. And so Rivers Breeze exists because empty nesters and younger people with no children want to live close to downtown, but not in downtown, and they want an easy commute. Ludlow offers that. Another thing, South Bank is building the Riverfront Commons, which is a walkway that will connect Ludlow all the way into Fort Thomas. Part of this has already been built. Some of it through Ludlow has been built. This will be walking and biking trails that are going to connect the river cities all the way across Northern Kentucky. This is really exciting. And it's going to have a huge impact on the development of all the river cities, but Ludlow is looking forward to it. This little turn here in Ludlow is taking it to the bike paths that go up into Duvu Park. So there's these little nodes that kind of come off of it that take it to different places in Northern Kentucky. Ours is taking it to the bike trails in Ludlow, the walking trails, and to Duvu Park. And so Ludlow has benefited greatly from some of these more recent developments with people moving back to the city. So the car culture is kind of playing to our favor now. It didn't play to our favor after World War II when people were leaving. It's now playing back into our favor. So we've got a lot of these wonderful businesses that have existed in Ludlow for years. Ronald B. Jones Funeral Home, Bullock Funeral Home, Tom Gaither's Art Studio, Ideal Supply, which is one of the oldest. It was started in early 1900s. Reeves Fruit Market, early 1900s. Hader's Dry Goods. This is like walking into a 100-year-old store. It's literally isn't a building that's over 100 years old, but it's still a traditional dry goods, which it's very hard to find anymore. But in recent years, we've had a lot of new businesses coming into town too. So if you haven't been to Ludlow in a while, our old theater is now Circus Mojo has moved into there, and they have an event center. They have pizza and food. They have circus performers, and there's a brewery in this building. It's a great addition to downtown. Second Sight Spirits is in the one of the Kroger building that was built in the 1940s. They are distilling vodka and bourbon primarily. The Winkle brothers own an art studio across the street from Gaither. So we've got a little cultural district growing in Ludlow. This is the Ludlow Pharmacy in the Marketplace. These stand on the old Richie property. Taste on Elm is a great place to get lunch. It's a great place to pick up wine. They've got a lot of specialty items. This is the Ludlow Parlor, which is selling ice cream and cookie dough. All these are new additions within the last probably 15 years to Ludlow, some newer than others. The Ludlow Tavern, which is a great place to eat. Our railroad viewing station, which is you can actually climb it, or you can go up in an elevator, and the bridge would be right here, the railroad bridge. You can actually go up here. There's panels here about the history of the railroad in Ludlow, and you can watch the train. So it's a great place to see the old train culture. Ludlow Museum is right near the train station. Lita Ruth is a women's clothing store. This is Empower Studios, which is a workout site. On the last thing I did about Ludlow, I forgot Empower Studios, and I told Christy I wouldn't forget them this time. It's in the old St. James School. So she's got the old St. James School. She does a full fitness program in the building. This is a classroom that I spent my 5th grade year in. So it's interesting to see this building being used in a different way. And that's where I'm ending. So questions.
Okay, well, first, I think we forgot to give the quiz question. So I went ahead and I did that in the chat. So
Okay.
Elmwood Hall, the Carneal House, is the oldest house in Ludlow and one of the oldest brick homes in the region. So the question was, in what year was the home completed? So we had some answers. We had 1818, 1826, 1820. So
who was the first one that got 1820?
I think it was Ruth Bamberger.
That is Ruth. Ruth lives in Ludlow, and Ruth is correct. And the owner of Elmwood Hall is here, and he was very nice and didn't play.
Oh, goodness.
You would have easily gotten that one.
Okay, so Ruth, if you could go ahead and send me your information, you can send me in the chat directly to me your address. We'll send you your prize.
Oh, thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Ruth. So
Ruth is actually on the Ludlow Historical Society, which is doing wonderful work in Ludlow. They're buying properties and rehabbing them and selling them back into as single-family homes. So the Historical Society is another great addition in the last 15 years to Ludlow.
Well, Ruth did have a question earlier that she asked. She wanted to know where exactly were the Pullman shops, and she wants to know what is on that site today.
The Pullman shops were closer down towards the swim club, Ruth. So if you know where the swim club is, it's where Stokesay Street runs into Adela, or as we call in Ludlow, Adelia. And don't ask why. I don't know why we call it Adelia. It's spelled Adela. but old timers like me all call it Adelia. So where Stokesay and Ludford kind of run into Adelia Street down towards the swim club is approximately where the Pullman shops were.
Oh, thank you, David.
You're welcome, Ruth.
We had a question from Sage Bar. She wanted to know how many miles are the walking trails?
The walking trails through Ludlow eventually will be a little bit over a mile. I'm not sure how long the entire route will be, but it basically will cover all the way through the city of Ludlow, all the way through Covington, across the Licking into Newport, Bellevue, Dayton, and into Fort Thomas. So it'll be many, many miles. It eventually, the South Bank Partners is getting financing, so they're building it in stages. It's going to connect into the, if you've seen the new amphitheater they built at the foot of Madison Avenue recently in Covington, it will connect into that. So it's connecting into some of these major attractions along the way. So it's really going to be a really cool addition to Northern Kentucky. Bike riding, walking, jogging, and you're doing it all along the river. So in Ludlow, we have no flood wall. Ludlow didn't get a flood wall. And we're glad we don't have a flood wall because it blocks the view. And so when you're doing it, when you're on the path in Ludlow, the part that's been finished, you get these wonderful views of the other side of the river, and you get to see the river in its kind of its natural state. So as it goes through Northern Kentucky, you get a new view depending on where you are, but it's going to be a really cool addition to Northern Kentucky. It already is, but when it's complete, it's going to be something.
Well, we've got some great feedback from a lot of people about a great presentation. Come back again. Great presentation. Wonderful as usual. We even got a little bit of an advertisement here for an Amy Katzman. Her husband's band is going to be playing at Burkus on Friday night.
Excellent.
So yeah, she said she was interested in this presentation and she didn't know she'd be doing an advertisement. So that's that. Also, we have our Burkus comes to our concerts, our Music at BCM concerts, and they have some beer on tap that you can also purchase. So
yes, Paul Miller owns Burkus. He is actually not a Northern Kentucky. Well, he is a Northern Kentucky native, come to think of it. He was, I think, from Crescent Springs originally.
I thought he went to Roundhouse.
He did. He's done some really incredible things at that old theater in Ludlow and the building next door. And he's got some big plans coming down the road too that we're excited about in town. So, and then if you look at the other end of town, the western end of town where the Knights of Columbus is, there was an old trailer park there, the Vets. There is some development that's going to be going on in there as well. There's a development company that's buying up property along the river. So it's a very high kept secret. I don't even know what's going in there, but something's going to be going in there along the river. So we're looking forward to seeing what that development's going to be and, you know, how it's going to change Ludlow. Again, traffic. You know, we're in the era of cars right now. And so let's see where that takes us.
Well, this has been a great presentation. I've loved seeing all the photographs and the maps, and it's great that the library is such a great resource where you can go to their webpage and you can go and see like faces and places and see all those great photographs. And yeah, so make sure to check those out. Let's see, we do have, before we go, I want to let everybody know that we do have a Music at BCM concert tomorrow night. We have Mike Wade performing. Doors open at 6, shows from 7 to 9. Great fun for the whole family. We have a baseball exhibit on Jim Bunning open right now and a Harlan Hubbard. So be sure to check those out. For more Northern Kentucky history through the week, check out our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, where you can find the latest installment of Curators Chat, where BCM Curator of Collections Jason French takes on fascinating places and artifacts from BCM's collection and across the region. Please like and subscribe. That's all that we're going to have time for. We actually ran over just a little bit, but it was a wonderful presentation. So thanks again, Dave, for everything.
You're welcome. I'm always glad to support the museum. They do great work. And if you haven't been to Ludlow recently, come on down.
As a reminder, there will not be a Northern Kentucky History Hour next week as we continue having our bi-weekly schedule for this summer. So we will be back on Wednesday, August 11th. Until then, take care, everyone, and good night. Thank you again. Have a great night.
Thank you all.
Bye, everyone.
You.